The encounter. Eric adjusted his visor and scanned the dense, foggy forest. The uncharted planet was nothing like he had imagined. Thick, towering trees twisted into unnatural shapes, and the air carried a strange hum, almost like a distant whisper. He wasn't here for adventure. This was supposed to be a routine resource survey. But as he moved deeper into the shadows, something didn't feel right. Then he heard it, a faint, trembling voice. "Don't come closer." Eric froze. The voice was soft, almost pleading, but it sent a chill down his spine. He squinted into the gloom, his flashlight sweeping across moss-covered roots and strange, glowing fungi. Nothing moved. "Who's there?" Eric called out cautiously. A figure shifted in the shadows. At first, it seemed like part of the forest, a cluster of leaves or vines. But then he noticed the glint of eyes. They were wide, reflecting the dim light like twin moons. Slowly, the figure emerged, revealing a frail, trembling alien girl. Her pale skin was streaked with dirt, her hair tangled like vines, and her thin frame shivered as if she were made of glass about to break. "Please," she said, stepping back, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't hurt me." Eric raised his hands in a calming gesture. "I'm not here to hurt anyone," he said softly. "I'm just a traveler." "Who are you?" The girl's eyes darted around nervously, and she hugged herself tightly. "It doesn't matter. You should leave. They'll come for me. And for you." Eric frowned. "Who's coming?" She didn't answer, only shook her head and took another step back. But as she moved, her knees buckled, and she collapsed against a tree, breathing heavily. Instinctively, Eric rushed forward, ignoring her protests. "Hey, it's okay," he said, crouching down beside her. "You're hurt. Let me help." She flinched at his touch but didn't pull away. Up close, Eric noticed strange scars running along her arms, faintly glowing in the dim light. They looked like wounds, but something about them seemed alive. "You shouldn't have come closer," she murmured, her voice breaking. "Now you're in danger too." Eric glanced around the forest. Danger from what? Are there predators out here? Her gaze met his, and he saw pure terror in her eyes. "Not predators. Hunters. They won't stop until they find me." Eric's grip tightened on his survival pack. Whoever this girl was, she was clearly in trouble. And judging by her condition, she wouldn't last long on her own. "I have a ship nearby," he said firmly. "I can take you somewhere safe." She shook her head violently. "There's no safe place. You don't understand. They'll track me anywhere I go. They always do." Eric didn't back down. "Then I'll help you fight them." For the first time, the girl's expression softened, though it was more disbelief than hope. "Why would you do that? You don't even know me." Eric shrugged. "Because leaving you here isn't an option. Now, can you stand?" The girl hesitated but finally nodded. With Eric's help, she got to her feet, though she leaned heavily against him. As they started moving toward his ship, the ground trembled slightly, and a low guttural growl echoed through the forest. Her grip on his arm tightened. "They're here." Eric looked back, his heart pounding. In the distance, he saw movement, a hulking shape weaving between the trees, too fast and too large to be anything friendly. "We need to move," he said, quickening his pace. The girl stumbled, but Eric didn't let her fall. He practically carried her as they pushed through the thick undergrowth. The growling grew louder, closer. Whatever was chasing them wasn't trying to be subtle anymore. Eric risked a glance over his shoulder and saw glowing red eyes peering through the darkness. "Just a little farther," he urged, spotting the faint outline of his ship through the trees. The girl gasped, her voice trembling. "You can't outrun them. They're faster, stronger." "Then we'll outsmart them," Eric said, determination hardening his voice. As they neared the clearing, a massive figure burst through the trees ahead of them, blocking their path. It was a towering alien hunter, its body covered in dark, metallic armor that seemed to shimmer unnaturally. Its face was hidden behind a mask, but its glowing red eyes locked onto Lyra with predatory intent. The girl whimpered, collapsing to her knees. "I told you, it's hopeless." Eric stepped in front of her, drawing his sidearm. The hunter tilted its head, almost amused, and then lunged. Eric fired, but the bullets bounced harmlessly off its armor. The hunter swiped at him, its claws grazing his shoulder as he dodged. Pain flared, but Eric didn't falter. "Get to the ship," he shouted at the girl. "I can't." "Yes, you can," Eric yelled, shoving her toward the clearing. The hunter roared and lunged again, but Eric threw a flash grenade, blinding it temporarily. Grabbing the girl's arm, he pulled her toward the ship. They stumbled inside just as the hunter recovered, slamming into the hull with a deafening crash. Eric slammed his fist on the control panel, and the ship roared to life, lifting off just as the hunter leaped toward them. The beast's claws scraped the hull, but failed to latch on as they soared into the sky. Inside the cockpit, the girl collapsed into a seat, shaking uncontrollably. Eric leaned against the controls, catching his breath. "You're safe now," he said. But the girl looked at him with haunted eyes. "You don't understand. This is only the beginning." The chase. The ship's engines hummed as it climbed through the planet's atmosphere, but Eric's mind raced faster than the craft. He glanced at the girl. Lyra, she had quietly whispered her name. She sat curled in the corner of the cockpit, her eyes distant, like she was bracing for the next disaster. "Lyra," Eric said, trying to sound calm. "Who are these hunters, and why are they after you?" She didn't answer at first. Her fingers traced the glowing scars on her arms as if they were the bars of a cage. Finally, she whispered, "They're not here for me. They're here for what I carry." Eric frowned. "What you carry?" Before she could answer, the ship's alarms blared. Red lights flashed across the console as multiple signals appeared on the radar, closing in fast. Eric's stomach dropped. "They found us," Lyra said, her voice hollow. "They always do." "Not this time," Eric said, gripping the controls. His jaw tightened as he saw the streaks of 3 hunter ships entering the atmosphere behind them. "Hold on." The first laser blast missed them by inches, lighting up the sky like a lightning bolt. Eric threw the ship into a dive, weaving between thick storm clouds. He pushed the throttle to its limit, the hull groaning under the strain. Lyra gasped as a second shot grazed the wing. "You can't outrun them. Their ships are faster." "I'm not planning to outrun them," Eric muttered. The dense clouds gave him an idea. He twisted the ship into a sharp turn, plunging into the thickest patch of storm cover. Thunder roared around them, and rain streaked the cockpit's windows. The radar blinked with static as the storm's interference grew. "They won't lose track of me," Lyra said, her hands gripping the armrests. "They're locked onto my signal." Eric glanced at her glowing scars, his mind racing. "Your signal. That's how they're tracking us." She nodded, fear flashing in her eyes. "It's in me, part of me. You should have left me." Eric ignored her. "No one gets left behind on my watch. We'll deal with your signal later. First, we survive." A third hunter ship appeared directly in front of them, its cannons glowing ominously. Eric yanked the controls, narrowly avoiding a head-on collision. The hunter ship veered to follow, its weapons charging for another blast. "Brace yourself," Eric shouted. With a sudden burst of speed, Eric flew low, skimming the treetops of a jungle below. He wove through massive alien trees, forcing the hunter ship to follow at a dangerous pace. Branches shattered as the hunter struggled to keep up, its larger craft unable to match Eric's nimble maneuvers. Then Eric saw it, a cliff edge ahead, the jungle dropping into a deep canyon. He grinned. "This is going to be close." Lyra's eyes widened. "What are you doing?" Eric didn't answer. He aimed the ship directly at the cliff, accelerating. The hunter ship stayed close, its cannons firing in frustration. At the last possible second, Eric pulled the controls, sending his ship into a sharp vertical climb. The hunter ship wasn't so lucky. Its momentum carried it over the cliff, and its massive hull smashed into the canyon wall, erupting in a fireball. "One down," Eric muttered, sweat dripping from his brow. But there were still two more. The radar pinged again, and Lyra tensed as she pointed to the viewport. The other two ships were flanking them, boxing them in like predators cornering prey. "They're not giving up," Lyra said, her voice breaking. "This is my fault. If you let me go," Eric interrupted sharply. "We don't quit because it's hard. Now trust me." Lyra stared at him, surprised by the fire in his voice. For the first time, her fear wavered, replaced by the faintest flicker of hope. Eric's hands flew over the controls. "They want to fight. Let's give them one." He toggled a switch, and the ship's rear-mounted mines armed themselves. As the two hunter ships moved in for the kill, Eric hit the release. A series of mines dropped from the ship's hull, scattering into the jungle below. The hunters hesitated, their pilots likely detecting the sudden mines. One of them tried to swerve, but it was too late. The first mine detonated, sending a shockwave through the air. The second hunter ship was caught in the blast, spiraling out of control before exploding in a brilliant flash. The last hunter ship pulled back, wary now. Eric smirked. Guess they're not so invincible after all. But just as he thought they were in the clear, the ship shook violently. Eric's head snapped to the console. It wasn't an attack. Something was wrong with the engines. "What's happening?" Lyra asked, gripping the seat. Eric's stomach dropped as he saw the readings. "The mines. The blast damaged us too. We're losing power." The ship began to descend, smoke trailing from its engines. The hunter ship circled above like a vulture, waiting for its prey to crash. "We're not going to make it," Lyra said, panic rising in her voice. Eric grabbed her hand, looking her in the eyes. "Yes, we will. I survived worse, and I'm not stopping now." The ship broke through the clouds, revealing a dense, rocky valley below. Eric gritted his teeth as he fought to stabilize the craft. They were coming in hard, but they weren't going down without a fight. As the ground rushed up to meet them, Eric's voice rang out. "Hang on, Lyra. We're not done yet." Unveiling the truth. The sharp hiss of the ship's failing engines filled the silence as Eric guided the damaged vessel into a rocky canyon. Sparks flew from the console, and the cockpit lights flickered ominously. Behind him, Lyra sat motionless, her glowing scars dimming slightly, her head resting against the wall, as if the fight had drained what little energy she had left. Eric tightened his grip on the controls. "We're down, but we're not out," he muttered, landing the ship with a hard thud. He quickly unbuckled his harness and turned to Lyra. "You okay?" he asked. Lyra's eyes fluttered open, and she gave him a weak nod. "For now." Eric grabbed a toolkit and moved toward the door. "Stay here. I'll check the damage." As he stepped outside, the harsh reality of their situation hit him. The ship was in worse shape than he thought. Engines leaking coolant, one wing barely attached, and scorch marks streaking the hull. He had been in plenty of tight spots before, but this one felt different. They weren't just running from danger. They were carrying it with them. Inside, Lyra stared at the faint blue glow of her scars. She hated them, the way they betrayed her presence, the way they reminded her of what she had lost. Eric's voice brought her back to the present. "Hey," he called from the open hatch. "You're not telling me everything." Lyra froze. She didn't respond, hoping he would drop it, but Eric wasn't letting this go. He climbed back inside, his expression a mix of determination and frustration. "You said they're after what you carry," he pressed. "What does that mean? Is it some kind of weapon? A code? I need answers, Lyra. I can't help you if I don't know what I'm up against." Lyra hugged her knees, her voice barely audible. "It's not a thing. It's me." Eric blinked. "You?" She nodded, her scars pulsing faintly as if responding to her emotions. My people were engineered to be stronger, faster, more intelligent. The galaxy called us perfect, until they realized what perfection could do. We weren't meant to lead. We were meant to serve. Her words hung in the air like a heavy weight. Eric sat across from her, his curiosity tempered by growing unease. So, they turned on you. They enslaved us, Lyra said bitterly. Our abilities made us valuable tools, but our masters feared rebellion. They found ways to keep us under control. These scars, she held up her arm, the dim light reflecting off the glowing patterns. They're trackers, but they're more than that. They link us to the hunters. They can always find me. Eric stared at the scars, his mind racing. Why not remove them? Her laugh was hollow, devoid of humor. If only it were that simple. The scars aren't just on my skin. They're inside me. They fused with my body, my essence. If you remove them, you kill me. For a moment, Eric didn't know what to say. He had faced plenty of enemies. But this wasn't just a fight. It was a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. They're afraid of what you are, he said finally. That's why they're hunting you. Lyra's gaze met his, her expression unreadable. They're afraid of what I could become. Before Eric could respond, the ship's proximity alarm blared, shattering the quiet. Lyra's scars flared brightly as she clutched her chest, her breathing ragged. They're here, she gasped. They found us. Eric scrambled to the console, his stomach sinking as he saw 3 new signals on the radar. The hunter ship that had circled earlier was back, and it had brought reinforcements. Looks like we got company, Eric said, grabbing his rifle. He turned to Lyra, who was struggling to her feet. You stay here. No, she said firmly, her voice trembling but resolute. I can't keep hiding. If I don't fight, they'll never stop. Eric hesitated. He could see the fear in her eyes, but also something else, a spark of determination that hadn't been there before. Fine, he said, handing her a small stun pistol. But you stay close. The two of them moved to the ship's exterior, the canyon walls towering above like silent sentinels. The hunters' ships descended slowly, their engines humming like predators preparing to strike. From the lead ship, a squad of armored hunters emerged, their weapons gleaming in the dim light. Eric crouched behind a boulder, scanning their approach. We can't take them head-on, he whispered. Got any tricks up your sleeve? Lyra's eyes glowed faintly as she focused on the ground beneath the hunters. I can disrupt them, but it won't last long. Eric nodded. Do it. Lyra closed her eyes, her scars flaring brightly. The ground trembled, and the hunters stumbled as if the very earth had turned against them. Taking advantage of the chaos, Eric fired a series of precise shots, taking down 2 of them. But the leader recovered quickly, his glowing red eyes locking onto Lyra. He raised his weapon, a strange energy blade humming to life. Get back, Eric shouted, stepping in front of her. The hunter lunged, but before he could strike, Lyra extended her hand. A shockwave of energy erupted from her, throwing the hunter backward. She collapsed to her knees, gasping for air. Eric pulled her to her feet as the remaining hunters regrouped. That's enough for now. Let's go. They retreated into the ship, Eric firing at their pursuers to cover their escape. As the hatch sealed behind them, Lyra slumped against the wall, her scars dimming once more. Eric knelt beside her. You've got more fight in you than you think, he said. Lyra looked at him, her voice barely a whisper. It won't be enough. Not against all of them. Eric's jaw tightened. Then we'll make it enough. Together. The sound of the hunters pounding on the hull echoed through the ship. Time was running out, but Eric wasn't giving up. Not on Lyra, and not on their chance to survive. Fight or flight. The pounding on the ship's hull was relentless, like a drumbeat of impending doom. Inside, Eric and Lyra sat in the dimly lit cockpit, the emergency lights casting flickering shadows across their tense faces. Lyra's glowing scars pulsed faintly, her breathing shallow as she tried to summon strength that seemed to escape her with every passing second. "They won't stop," Lyra said, her voice trembling. "They'll tear this ship apart if they have to." Eric tightened his grip on the controls, his jaw clenched. "Not if I have anything to say about it." Before Lyra could respond, the proximity alarm screamed again. Eric's stomach dropped as he saw 3 more signals appear on the radar. Reinforcements. The hunters had called for backup. "More," Lyra whispered, her voice barely audible. "There's no way out." Eric shook his head. "There's always a way out. We just have to find it." He activated the ship's remaining defenses, but the console flashed red. Shields were critically low, and the weapons systems were barely functional. A glance outside the viewport showed the hunter ships circling like vultures over a dying animal. Eric slammed his fist against the console. "Damn it." Lyra flinched, her glowing scars dimming further. "You should have left me," she murmured. "I told you this would happen." Eric turned to her, his expression hard. "And I told you I don't abandon people. Now, if you've got some kind of secret power, now's the time to use it." Lyra hesitated, guilt and fear flashing in her eyes. "If I use my abilities again, I might not recover. The scars, they're not just trackers. They drain me every time I fight." Eric's mind raced. He needed a plan, and fast. The hunters weren't just closing in, they were toying with them, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. He glanced at the terrain on the display. A jagged mountain range stretched to the north, its peaks dotted with unstable energy deposits. "That's it," Eric said, an idea forming. "We'll lure them into the mountains." Lyra looked at him, confused. "What good will that do?" "They'll just follow us." Eric grinned grimly. "They'll follow us, all right. Right into an energy field they won't see coming." He powered up the engines, which sputtered and groaned in protest. The ship shook as it lifted off, the damaged thrusters barely holding together. Eric gritted his teeth and pushed forward, aiming for the mountains. Outside, the hunter ships immediately gave chase, their sleek forms cutting through the air like blades. A volley of laser fire streaked past, missing the ship by mere meters. Lyra clung to her seat, her glowing scars flickering erratically. "They're faster," she said, panic creeping into her voice. "They'll catch us before we make it." "Not if I keep them busy," Eric replied. He flicked a switch, deploying the last of the ship's countermeasures, chaff clouds and decoy drones. The hunters hesitated for a split second, their sensors overwhelmed, and Eric used the opportunity to dive into the narrow mountain pass. The jagged peaks rose around them like the teeth of a massive beast. Eric guided the ship through the twisting terrain, his hand steady despite the chaos. Behind them, the hunters closed the gap, their weapons lighting up the darkened skies. "They're too close," Lyra shouted. Eric's eyes narrowed. Not for long. As they reached the center of the pass, Eric spotted what he was looking for, a cluster of glowing energy deposits embedded in the rocky walls. He adjusted the ship's trajectory, making it appear as though they were struggling to stay airborne. The hunters took the bait. They closed in rapidly, their ships moving in for the kill. "Now," Eric yelled, slamming a lever on the console. The ship's thrusters fired in reverse, slowing them just enough to trigger the energy deposits. A massive explosion rocked the mountains, sending shockwaves through the air. 2 of the hunter ships were caught in the blast, their hulls disintegrating in a flash of light. The remaining hunter ship veered wildly, struggling to regain control. Eric didn't wait to see what happened next. He pushed the ship's engines to their limit, rocketing out of the pass as debris rained down behind them. Lyra stared at him in disbelief. You destroyed them." Eric exhaled slowly, his hand shaking slightly on the controls. "Not all of them. And we're not out of this yet." The ship's warning lights flared again, signaling critical damage. Eric glanced at Lyra, who was slumped in her seat, her glowing scars barely visible now. "You okay?" he asked. Lyra nodded weakly. I'll survive. But Eric, they'll send more. They always do. Eric frowned, his mind already racing with the next move. Then we need to change the game. No more running. No more hiding. If they want to fight, we'll give it to them. Lyra looked at him, her fear giving way to something else. Hope. What are you planning? Eric smiled grimly. First, we fix this ship. Then, we make them regret ever coming after you. Outside, the wreckage of the hunter ship smoldered in the distance, but the storm of danger hadn't passed. It had only begun. A fragile bond. The faint hum of the ship's damaged systems was the only sound as Eric worked to patch up the main engine. His hands moved with precision, but his mind was clouded with doubt. They had survived the hunter's assault, but barely. Every system in the ship was holding on by a thread, much like Lyra herself. He glanced over his shoulder. Lyra sat slumped against the bulkhead, her head resting on her knees. The faint glow of her scars flickered erratically, like a failing light bulb. She hadn't said a word since they escaped the mountains. Hey, Eric called, wiping grease from his hands. How are you holding up? Lyra didn't look at him. Her voice was soft, almost broken. You should have let them take me. Eric's brow furrowed. Why would you say that? Her head lifted slightly, her haunted eyes meeting his. Because this isn't your fight. You don't owe me anything, and all I've done is drag you into danger. Eric sighed and sat down across from her, leaning his back against the cold metal wall. You think this is about owing you. You think I'm sticking around because I feel guilty. Lyra didn't answer, but her silence said enough. You're wrong, Eric continued. I didn't have to help you. I chose to. And yeah, it's been messy, but running away doesn't fix anything. It just leaves you with the same problem tomorrow. Lyra's fingers traced one of her scars absent-mindedly. You don't understand what it's like. I can't stop them. No one can. Even if we survive, they'll keep coming. Eric leaned forward, his tone firm but not harsh. Maybe you're right. Maybe they will. But you know what? Every time they come after you, they'll have to go through me. And I don't go down easy. Her lips twitched slightly, almost forming a smile, but it faded just as quickly. Why are you doing this? Why do you care so much? Eric hesitated, searching for the right words. Because I've been where you are. Alone, scared, thinking the whole galaxy's against you. Someone gave me a chance to fight back, and I'm still here because of it. Now it's my turn to pass that on. Lyra's gaze softened, but her expression was still clouded with doubt. You don't even know what I am. Eric chuckled lightly. I know enough. You're not the monster they make you out to be. You're just someone trying to survive. She shook her head. It's more than that. My kind, we weren't just hunted. We were hated, feared for what we could do. They think we're too dangerous to live. Eric leaned back, his eyes thoughtful. Maybe they're scared because they know they can't control you. And fear makes people do stupid things. For a moment, silence hung between them. Then Lyra spoke, her voice barely audible. I'm scared too. Eric's heart tightened at the vulnerability in her words. I know, he said gently, but you don't have to face it alone anymore. Lyra looked at him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. What if I lose control? What if I hurt you? You won't, Eric said without hesitation, because you're stronger than that. And even if you don't believe it yet, I do. Her scars flickered faintly, a dim light in the darkness. She took a shaky breath, her hands clenching into fists. I don't know if I can fight them. Eric smiled faintly. Then we'll fight them together. The proximity alarm jolted them both from the moment. Eric shot to his feet, his hand instinctively reaching for his weapon. The radar showed a single signal approaching fast. Another hunter ship. They're back, Lyra said, her voice trembling. Eric clenched his jaw. Let them come. He moved to the cockpit, activating the external cameras. The hunter ship loomed large, its sleek, predatory design illuminated by the dim starlight. But something was different. This ship wasn't attacking. Instead, it hovered just outside, as if watching. "What are they waiting for?" Lyra asked, stepping cautiously behind him. Eric frowned. "They're testing us. They know we're weak." Lyra's scars pulsed brighter, and she winced, clutching her arm. "They're trying to draw me out. The tracker. It's like a beacon for them." Eric's mind raced. They couldn't win a direct fight, not in their current state. But surrender wasn't an option either. He glanced at Lyra, her glow dimming again as exhaustion threatened to take over. Then an idea hit him, a risky, desperate plan that might be their only chance. "Lyra," he said, turning to her, "what if we turn the tracker against them?" She looked at him, confused. "What do you mean?" "If we overload the tracker, make it emit a signal strong enough, we could disrupt their systems," Eric explained. "It might knock them off course long enough for us to escape." Lyra's eyes widened. "That could kill me." Eric placed a hand on her shoulder, his expression serious but resolute. "Not if we do it right. I'll need you to trust me." She hesitated, fear flashing in her eyes. But as she looked at him, she saw something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Taking a deep breath, she nodded. "I trust you," she said. Eric squeezed her shoulder gently. "Good. Let's show them what happens when they mess with the wrong team." As the hunter ship inched closer, Eric and Lyra moved to the console, their bond solidifying in the face of impossible odds. They weren't just fighting to survive anymore. They were fighting to win. The reckoning. The battered ship drifted through the endless expanse of space, its engine sputtering with every pulse of energy. Inside, Eric and Lyra prepared for what felt like an impossible task. The hunter fleet was closing in, and the tracker embedded in Lyra's body glowed faintly, broadcasting their location like a beacon. Time was running out. Eric stared at the holographic display, the enemy signals forming an ominous ring around them. He clenched his fists. "They're boxing us in." Lyra stood behind him, her glowing scars flickering as her fear and exhaustion threatened to overwhelm her. "You should escape while you can," she whispered. "I'll stay behind. If they capture me, they might let you go." Eric spun around, his eyes blazing. "You think I came this far to leave you behind? Forget it. We're in this together." Lyra's voice wavered. "Eric, I'm just one person. You can't risk your life for me." "You're not just one person," Eric said firmly. "You're proof they can't control everything. That terrifies them, and it's exactly why we're not giving up." He turned back to the console, his mind racing. The odds were stacked against them, but he wasn't about to let that stop him. His eyes locked onto a nearby system on the star map, an abandoned mining facility orbiting a dying star. "That's where we make our stand," Eric said, pointing to the map. Lyra frowned. "A dead star. What good will that do?" Eric grinned, though it was grim. "It's not the star that matters. It's the facility. If we can overload their energy grid and lure the hunters close enough, we might be able to trigger a chain reaction." Lyra's eyes widened. "You want to use the facility as a weapon?" "Exactly," Eric said. "It's risky, but it's our best shot." She hesitated, then nodded. "Let's do it." As they approached the facility, the eerie glow of the dying star bathed their ship in pale light. The mining station loomed ahead, a hulking mass of metal and debris, its systems dormant for decades. Eric brought the ship in for a rough landing, the hull groaning under the strain. Inside the station, the air was stale and cold. Eric and Lyra worked quickly, navigating the labyrinth of rusted corridors to find the energy core. Each step echoed ominously, as if the station itself was warning them of the danger ahead. Finally, they reached the core, a massive, dormant sphere surrounded by shattered machinery. Eric's eyes scanned the control panel, his fingers flying over the keys as he began reactivating the systems. "This place is falling apart," Lyra said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you sure this will work?" "It'll work," Eric replied, though he wasn't entirely sure himself. "We just need to give them a reason to come closer." Lyra's scars glowed faintly, and she winced. "The tracker. They're getting closer. They know we're here." Eric nodded. "Good. That's the point." The hunter fleet emerged from hyperspace like a swarm of predators. Their sleek, black ships encircled the mining station, their weapon systems glowing with deadly intent. Inside the station, Eric and Lyra watched the display as the ships closed in. "They're scanning the station," Lyra said. "They'll know it's unstable." "That's what we're counting on," Eric said, finishing the final adjustments to the core. The sphere began to hum, faint at first, but growing louder, its surface glowing with unstable energy. The console lit up with warnings. The core was reaching critical levels, and the station's structure was beginning to buckle under the strain. Eric turned to Lyra. "This is it," he said. "Once the core goes, we'll have seconds to get out of here. Are you ready?" Lyra nodded, though her hands trembled. "Ready." Eric activated the comm system, broadcasting a message to the hunters. "You want her. Come and get her." The taunt worked. The hunter ships moved closer, their weapons aimed directly at the station. Eric and Lyra ran back to their ship, the unstable energy of the core shaking the entire facility. As the hunters approached, Lyra hesitated, looking back at the glowing core. "What if it's not enough?" Eric grabbed her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "It will be. Trust me." They boarded the ship and strapped in, the engines groaning as Eric powered them up. The hunter fleet was almost on top of the station now, their proximity triggering the final stage of the plan. "Now," Eric shouted, slamming the controls. The ship rocketed away from the station just as the core reached critical mass. A blinding flash erupted behind them, followed by a massive shockwave that tore through space. The hunter ships were caught in the explosion, their sleek forms disintegrating in the chaos. Eric and Lyra watched from the cockpit as the station collapsed into the dying star, the remnants of the fleet vanishing in the inferno. The radar showed no remaining pursuers. For the first time, they were alone. Lyra let out a shaky breath, her glowing scars dimming to a faint pulse. "You did it," she whispered. Eric leaned back in his seat, exhaustion washing over him. "We did it." For a moment, they sat in silence, the weight of their victory sinking in. But Eric knew this wasn't the end. The hunters might be gone, but the people who sent them were still out there. "We're not done yet," he said, his voice resolute. "But for now, we live to fight another day." Lyra looked at him, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "Together." Eric smiled. "Always. A new hope." The aftermath of the explosion still lingered in the void of space, a shimmering haze where the hunter fleet once loomed. Inside the battered ship, Eric and Lyra sat in silence, their breath steadying as the reality of their survival sank in. The faint hum of the ship's engines was the only sound, but it carried a sense of fragile victory. Lyra broke the silence, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're gone." Eric nodded, his eyes scanning the empty radar. "For now." Lyra looked down at her glowing scars, which pulsed faintly but no longer carried the same ominous light. "You risked everything. For me." Eric leaned back in his seat, exhaustion etched into his face. "Yeah, well, I've been told I'm bad at quitting." Lyra's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. "You're more than that. You're different. No one's ever fought for me like this." Eric turned to face her, his expression soft but serious. "You're worth fighting for, Lyra. Don't let anyone make you think otherwise." Before Lyra could respond, a soft beep from the console interrupted them. Eric frowned and leaned forward, his fingers flying over the controls. "We've got incoming." Lyra tensed. More hunters. Eric shook his head, his brow furrowed. "No, it's a transmission." He tapped a button, and a flickering hologram appeared. It showed a figure cloaked in shadow, their voice distorted but calm. "Human pilot and fugitive Lyra," the voice said. "Your actions have not gone unnoticed. You've made powerful enemies, but also unexpected allies. Lyra's scars flared slightly as she stared at the figure. Who are you? The figure hesitated, then replied, someone who believes in second chances. There's a place where you'll be safe, where those like you can start again. Eric's eyes narrowed. And why should we trust you? The figure chuckled softly. Because the alternative is to keep running, and we both know how that ends. I'll transmit the coordinates. The choice is yours. The hologram vanished, leaving the cockpit in silence once more. Eric glanced at Lyra, who seemed lost in thought. What do you think? He asked. Lyra hesitated, her fingers brushing over the scars on her arms. If this is a trap, it's no worse than staying out here, Eric finished for her. But if it's real? Lyra nodded slowly. If it's real, it could be a new start. Eric tapped the console, locking in the coordinates. Then let's find out. The journey to the coordinates was tense but uneventful. When the ship emerged from hyperspace, Eric and Lyra were met with a breathtaking sight. A hidden station built into the orbit of a massive nebula, its surface shimmering with vibrant colors. Dozens of ships, all shapes and sizes, floated around it like fireflies. Lyra stared, her eyes wide. What is this place? Eric brought the ship into the docking bay, his voice quiet with awe. A sanctuary. As they disembarked, they were greeted by a group of individuals, humans and aliens alike, each bearing signs of survival and resilience. One stepped forward, a tall alien with scars similar to Lyra's, though faded with time. You made it, the alien said, their voice warm. Welcome, sister. Lyra froze, her eyes brimming with emotion. You're like me. The alien nodded. We all are. Here you'll find others who've escaped, who've fought, who've survived. You're not alone anymore. Eric stepped back, watching as Lyra moved toward the group. For the first time, her posture wasn't weighed down by fear or doubt. She stood taller, her scars glowing softly, not as a burden, but as a symbol of endurance. As the group led her away, Lyra turned back to Eric. You're coming too, right? Eric smiled faintly. I've got some repairs to make, but I'll stick around. Someone's got to make sure you don't get into too much trouble. Lyra laughed softly, the sound light and free. I'll hold you to that. Later, as Eric worked on the ship, Lyra approached, her expression thoughtful. Eric. Yeah. She hesitated, then said, Thank you. For everything. Eric looked up, his smile warm. You don't have to thank me, Lyra. Just keep fighting. That's thanks enough. She nodded, her scars glowing brighter now, not with fear, but with hope. Together, they had faced the impossible, and while the galaxy was still dangerous, they had found something worth holding onto. A fragile bond that promised a brighter future. For the first time, Lyra didn't feel alone, and neither did Eric.